Hi guys, so for book club week, I've been reading The Cocktail Waitress, A Woman's Work in a Man's World by James Bradley. It was published by John Williams Sons Inc. in 1975. The main reason why I chose this book is because it gave me a lot of inspiration and correlated with my research topic, which is the perspective and experiences of waitresses here in La Crosse. The main topic of this book was the life of a cocktail waitress working at Brady's Bar, which is just a bar somewhere in the Midwest, through the perspective and experiences of waitresses themselves. The major research question overall was how gender kind of influences social interactions, network statuses, and culture of bar life in a structural system such as Brady's Bar. Throughout the book, I kind of noticed that there were three major themes that stood out to me. The first being gender differences, the second being the social structure and network, and the third being relationship dynamics. So to begin, I want to talk about gender differences. The major key concept under this one was the female and male roles. So the first example they kind of had was they stated that there was this handicap rule, and the handicap rule is a rule that is set up in a way that some individuals are more disadvantaged than others, and there is not this cohesive fairness. One particular example that they really highlighted was that the male bartenders prior to their shift were allowed to drink as many drinks as they wanted, and they could drink after their shift. However, the female waitresses were not allowed to drink prior to their shift, and they had to be almost welcomed by one of the male bartenders for a drink after their shift. I think this example shows that there isn't fairness amongst the male bartenders and female waitresses, and that there are disadvantages in being a female working at Brady's Bar. Another example they kind of talked about was keeping busy. In the book, it talked about how the female waitresses had to look like they were constantly being busy and doing things, whereas the male bartenders were allowed to kind of just hang out and make conversations with other customers. They used the quote, "In the situations where men and women work together, the same activity may be labeled non-work if it is done by a woman, but some special form of work if it is done by a man," which I think just reiterates that example. The male bartenders kind of standing around and making chit chat was some special form of work, whereas if the female waitresses were to do that, it was labeled non-work. They weren't doing their job. Again, kind of just showing the power difference in being female versus male working at Brady's Bar. The third kind of example they talked about was giving and serving orders. So it was the waitress's job to give the drinking orders to the bartender and to make it as easy and simple for the bartenders. When a drink was given, it was the waitress's job to obviously take the order, tally up how much that order was going to cost, add the straws to the drink, the garnishes, then bring it back to the customer and possibly have to deal with the drink being wrong and the customer being unhappy. Whereas the male bartenders only had to make the drink and ring up the total. In the book, it said, "In our society, it is a cultural rule that males do the central important tasks and the division of labor while females do the supporting tasks." And through this example, they kind of talked about how when a drink was good and the customer really liked it, the male bartenders were always getting the praise and being thanked. However, when a customer was unhappy with the drink and it didn't taste right, that type of energy wasn't still going to the male bartenders. It was now getting switched, and it was putting the blame on the female waitresses. So again, kind of just showing that power difference between being male and female working at Brady's Bar, which was one of the major themes of this whole entire book. The second major theme I kind of wanted to talk about was the social structure and network. The book kind of explained that there was a social structure within Brady's Bar, and they went into detail with each status, and they kind of talked about it in terms of a pyramid. So at the very top, well, I should go back. You first have the three categories: managers, employees, and customers. And at the very top, you had your owner, Mr. Brady, and your managers, John and Mark Brady. They obviously had the highest social status at Brady's Bar. Their presence was a symbolic affirmation of authority. And the next kind of tier, you had your bartenders, Tom, Rob, Jim, Dave, George, and Steve. And then the waitresses, Denise, Joyce, Sharon, Stephanie, Holly, Sandy, and Sue. With this tier, there was a bartender versus waitress underlying mentality. So the bartenders did hold a more dominance over the waitresses, kind of going back again to the female and male roles, with the males kind of having more of a power over the females working at Brady's bar. However, the waitresses, they all did have a close unity with each other in most instances because of their shared common status of being waitresses. So the bartenders were kind of ahead of the waitresses, but when it came in terms of waitresses, there wasn't one waitress that had more of a higher status than the other. They kind of all shared that common status of just being Brady's bar waitresses. And the next year, we had the real regulars versus regulars. And the book talked about how it was essential to distinguish the difference between these two because the waitresses' interactions were very different. The real regulars had way more benefits and got more attention from the servers just because they come in more frequently and provide business to Brady's bar. And then at the very bottom was all the other types of customers, and the book talked about how these other types of customers were classified amongst waitresses in different types of categories. So examples were the loners, the couples, the businessman, and then the female customers. So again, there was this huge social structure within Brady's bar, and the major theme was just kind of talking about each one and the status they held and kind of like their important role within Brady's bar. The third major theme that I wanted to talk about was the relationship dynamics. There was kind of two major relationship dynamics that were happening amongst Brady's bar. The first one kind of being the bartender and waitress relationship. Their relationships were very unique, and the book kind of labeled them as to have a joking relationship. And with having a joking relationship, there was these rules that this book kind of highlighted. And the rules were, it was restricted to certain participants, so the bartenders and waitresses. It was restricted to certain settings, so obviously this happened at Brady's bar and Brady's bar only. It involved ritual, insults, and sexual topics. So one example they said was that one of the male bartenders would constantly unhook one of the female waitresses' bras. And so that was just kind of an example of the insults and sexual topics that would kind of go back and forth between the bartenders and waitresses. And lastly, it is a public encounter. So all of this interaction kind of happened in the open of Brady's bar for everyone to see. These type of encounters were just underlying rules when it came to the relationships between the Brady bartenders and waitresses, and they each all had their own unique joking relationship with one another. The book then talked about the other big important relationship, which was the customer and waitress relationship. These were very important relationships, and they vary depending on the frequency of the customer. So the regulars obviously were allowed to have more of a joking relationship with the waitresses than the non-regulars, and they had more of an intimate relationship because they came in so much more than other customers. The male customers often found it their right to be flirtatious with the waitresses. So that was kind of a lot of the male customer and waitress relationship dynamics, was like being flirty and kind of sexualizing the waitresses at Brady's bar. And then the third kind of relationship was like the female customers that came in with the waitresses. The book kind of talked about how the female customers never tip and they complain about everything and get these like crazy exotic drinks, which really annoyed and frustrated the waitresses working at Brady's bar, which strained their relationships when it came to that. So again, there was just a lot of different unique relationships happening within Brady's bar. The methodology and specific methods that happened was the author did ethnographic research, which again is just observing the waitresses and bartenders and just the overall dynamic within Brady's bar. He witnessed the realities and experiences specifically of 7 waitresses that worked at Brady's bar, Sandy, Denise, Sue, Sharon, Holly, Joyce, and Stephanie. And oftentimes they were referred to as Brady's girls. The overall major themes and findings. So the first major finding is that in Brady's bar, there is a sexual division between males and females. The bartenders were worship-liked, whereas the waitresses were talked down to, diminished, and blamed, although they are the backbone for most of what the bartenders do and the overall success of Brady's bar. The second major finding is there is a social network and structure within Brady's bar. It's structured like a pyramid, with the owner being at the highest status on top of the pyramid and the customers being on the lowest peg of the pecking order. And the third major finding is there is a complex dynamic relationship amongst everyone in Brady's bar. So not every relationship is the exact same, as some relationships being more casual in terms of joking around than others, which correlates again to the social network of status and where you fall in that pyramid that has been established at Brady's bar. I did want to mention, contribution-wise, the author had over 30 different references he used to help him research and write this scholarly book, which I think is just a huge testimony to the dedication he had in understanding the dynamic of Brady's bar and just kind of figuring out what it is like being a woman working in the food industry, specifically working at Brady's bar. And I think he did a great job capturing all the difficulties and struggles and just really bringing awareness to how hard it is being a woman working with males in the food industry. My final thoughts and key takeaways is I highly recommend this book to anyone interested in learning more about the real life experiences and perspectives of being a woman working in any type of industry, but specifically waitressing. This book has opened my eyes to an entirely different social complexity that exists within the serving industry for women. Although this book was published in 1975, it is still very much relevant to today's modern times. Some of the findings that were uncovered in this book may not be as prevalent in modern times due to the efforts taken in providing environments and working environments that are more inclusive to both men and women. However, after using this book for inspiration in my research project pertaining to waitresses in lacrosse, I've realized through hearing their experiences and perspectives that there are findings from this book that are still very much relevant, such as the social network and the variety of different relationships that are formed in the restaurants today. So, like I said,